The Mediterranean Sea, a glittering blue expanse, once a highway of trade, now about to become a battlefield. On one shore stands Rome, a rising republic of iron discipline and relentless ambition. Its legions march with unmatched order, its people driven by a hunger for glory. Across the sea stands Carthage, ancient power of merchants and sailors. Its harbors teem with wealth, its fleets rule the waves, and its generals command the loyalty of men and even beasts of war. For decades, the two powers eyed each other with suspicion, each aware that the Mediterranean was too small for both to rule. Their collision would spark a century of conflict, a war of elephants and legions, of cunning generals and relentless soldiers, of cities burned and civilizations broken. This was not just a war for land, it was a war for domination of the ancient world. This was the Punic Wars. Part 1. The origins of the Punic Wars and the struggle for Sicily. The Punic Wars were not born overnight. They were the culmination of years of tension, suspicion, and rivalry between two of the most powerful states in the ancient Mediterranean. Rome and Carthage were very different civilizations culturally, politically, and militarily, but their ambitions were destined to clash. To understand how these wars began, we must first step back and examine the nature of both powers before their fateful collision. Rome before the wars. By the early 3rd century BCE, Rome had risen from a small Latin city-state into the dominant power of the Italian peninsula. Through a combination of military skill, clever alliances, and an unshakable determination to never surrender, Rome subdued rivals such as the Samnites, the Etruscans, and the Greek colonies in southern Italy. Rome's greatest strength lay in its army, the legions. Unlike the mercenary-based forces of many Mediterranean powers, the Roman legions were composed of citizen soldiers who fought not only for pay, but for honor, duty, and the glory of Rome. Every defeat Rome suffered was answered with a renewed determination to fight again. This resilience would become one of the defining factors in their wars against Carthage. By 264 BCE, Rome had unified nearly all of Italy under its influence. Yet, for all its power on land, Rome was still a newcomer to the sea. Naval warfare was not its strength. That realm belonged to its soon-to-be greatest rival, Carthage. Before the wars, Carthage was a city of merchants, sailors, and traders. Founded centuries earlier by Phoenician settlers from Tyre, it had grown into the richest and most powerful city in the western Mediterranean. Located in modern-day Tunisia, Carthage controlled an expansive maritime empire that stretched across North Africa, Spain, Sardinia, Corsica, and parts of Sicily. Carthage's strength was its navy. Its fleets were unmatched in size and skill, patrolling trade routes and ensuring the steady flow of wealth into its harbors. The Carthaginians were masters of commerce, but they were also capable of fielding powerful armies. Unlike Rome, however, Carthage relied heavily on mercenaries, Iberian warriors, Numidian cavalry, Gallic tribesmen, and even war elephants. This diverse force was both a strength and a weakness. While it provided flexibility, it often lacked the discipline and loyalty of Rome's citizen legions. Rome and Carthage were not natural enemies at first. In fact, the two powers had signed treaties in earlier centuries to regulate their interactions. But as Rome grew stronger and Carthage continued to dominate the seas, their interests inevitably overlapped, and nowhere did this tension come to a head more clearly than on the island of Sicily. The spark in Sicily. Sicily was the jewel of the central Mediterranean, fertile, strategically located, and dotted with wealthy cities. It was both an economic prize and a military necessity. Whoever controlled Sicily could project power into both Italy and North Africa. By the mid-3rd century BCE, Carthage already had a strong presence on the western side of the island, while Greek city-states controlled the east. Rome, newly dominant in southern Italy, looked across the narrow straits and saw both opportunity and danger. If Carthage controlled all of Sicily, it could threaten Roman territory directly. The spark came in 64 BCE in the city of Messana, on the northeastern tip of Sicily. The Mamertines, a band of Italian mercenaries who had seized control of the city, found themselves threatened by both the nearby Greek city of Syracuse and Carthaginian intervention. Desperate for help, they appealed first to Carthage, which sent aid, and then to Rome. Rome faced a difficult decision. Supporting the Mamertines meant directly opposing Carthage in Sicily, a step that would almost certainly lead to war. But rejecting the plea risked allowing Carthage to expand its influence just miles from the Italian mainland. In the end, Roman ambition and caution prevailed. Rome sent troops to Messana. The die was cast. The First Punic War begins 264 BCE. What began as a localized conflict over a single city quickly escalated into a full-scale war between two great powers. The First Punic War would last for over 2 decades, making it one of the longest wars of antiquity. Initially, Rome struggled. Carthage's naval superiority meant that Roman forces were often cut off and unable to supply their armies effectively. Rome, however, was nothing if not resourceful. Realizing that naval warfare was essential to victory, the Romans undertook the unprecedented task of building a fleet from scratch. Legend tells us that Rome captured a wrecked Carthaginian quinquereme, a large warship with 5 banks of oars, and used it as a model. Within months, Rome had constructed an entire fleet of ships, despite having little naval experience. Yet even with ships, they needed a way to neutralize Carthage's skilled sailors. The Roman innovation, the corvus. Rome's answer was ingenious. They invented the corvus, or crow, a massive boarding device that turned naval battles into land battles. The corvus was essentially a giant boarding bridge with a metal spike at the end. When a Roman ship approached an enemy vessel, the corvus would crash down, impaling the deck and locking the two ships together. Roman soldiers could then storm across and fight hand-to-hand, turning the sea into their preferred battlefield. This innovation proved devastating. At the Battle of Mylae in 260 BCE, the Roman fleet used the corvus to win a stunning victory over the Carthaginians. It was Rome's first major naval triumph, and it signaled that the Republic was not only capable of fighting at sea, but capable of defeating the masters of the waves, a war of attrition. The First Punic War dragged on for over 20 years, with both sides suffering staggering losses. Carthage's skilled general, Hamilcar Barca, father of the famous Hannibal, waged a relentless guerrilla campaign in Sicily, harassing Roman forces and refusing to surrender. Meanwhile, Rome endured catastrophic naval disasters, losing hundreds of ships and thousands of men to storms and poor seamanship. Despite these losses, Rome's resilience never wavered. Each time its fleets were destroyed, it rebuilt them. Each time its armies were defeated, it raised new legions. Carthage, by contrast, began to struggle under the strain. Its reliance on mercenaries proved costly, and its naval dominance was gradually eroded by Rome's relentless determination. The turning point, the Battle of the Aegates Islands, 241 BCE. The final decisive clash came in 241 BCE at the Battle of the Aegates Islands, off the western coast of Sicily. Rome, having rebuilt its fleet once again, confronted the Carthaginian navy in a desperate struggle for control of the seas. The Romans, now seasoned sailors, gained the upper hand. Their fleet shattered the Carthaginian ships, cutting off supplies and reinforcements to their armies in Sicily. Without naval support, Carthage's position on the island became untenable. Forced to negotiate, Carthage sued for peace. The treaty and its consequences. The terms of the peace were harsh. Carthage was forced to abandon Sicily entirely, marking the island as Rome's first overseas province. In addition, Carthage was required to pay a massive indemnity, draining its financial resources. The First Punic War had ended, but it was only the beginning. Rome had proven itself capable of defeating the greatest naval power of the age. For Carthage, the defeat was bitter and humiliating, yet its ambitions were far from over. A young generation of leaders, including Hamilcar Barca's son Hannibal, grew up vowing revenge. Part 2. Hannibal's War, the Second Punic War. If the First Punic War was a contest of endurance, the Second Punic War was a clash of genius, determination, and the raw will to survive. It gave the world one of history's most brilliant generals. Hannibal barkened, pushed Rome to the very brink of destruction. For nearly 2 decades, the war raged across Italy, Spain, North Africa, and the seas between them. It was during this conflict that the fate of the Mediterranean was truly decided. The rise of Hannibal. The story of the Second Punic War begins with one family, the Barcids. After Carthage's defeat in the First Punic War, General Hamilcar Barca was determined to restore his city's power. Unable to confront Rome directly, he turned to Spain. There, he built a new Carthaginian empire, rich in resources, soldiers, and opportunities for expansion. Hamilcar's son, Hannibal, was born into this atmosphere of bitterness and determination. According to legend, when Hannibal was a boy, his father made him swear a sacred oath to never be a friend to Rome. Whether true or myth, Hannibal grew up with Rome as his sworn enemy. By 221 BCE, after Hamilcar's death, Hannibal took command of the Carthaginian forces in Spain. Charismatic, daring, and brilliantly strategic, he quickly won the loyalty of his soldiers. But Hannibal's ambitions extended beyond Spain. He sought to strike directly at Rome and avenge his city's humiliation. The spark of war. Rome and Carthage had signed a treaty that established the Ebro River in Spain as the boundary of Carthaginian expansion. But just south of this river lay the city of Saguntum, allied with Rome. In 219 BCE, Hannibal besieged and captured Saguntum, deliberately challenging Rome's authority. Rome demanded Hannibal's surrender. Carthage refused. In 218 BCE, war was declared. Hannibal's audacious plan most expected Hannibal to defend Spain or strike at Sicily. Instead, he chose one of the most audacious military maneuvers in history, an overland invasion of Italy itself. In the autumn of 218 BCE, Hannibal led an army of roughly 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants north from Spain. He crossed the Pyrenees, marched through Gaul, and then faced the greatest challenge, the Alps. The crossing of the Alps was a feat that stunned the ancient world. Battling snowstorms, avalanches, hostile tribes, and treacherous paths, Hannibal's army suffered enormous losses. By the time he emerged into northern Italy, perhaps only half his men remained. Yet those who survived were hardened veterans, ready to follow their commander into battle. Rome had never faced anything like it. Hannibal strikes in Italy. Hannibal wasted no time. In late 218 BCE, he defeated a Roman force at the Battle of the Trebia River, using clever ambush tactics. A year later, in 217 BCE, he lured another Roman army into a trap at Lake Trasimene, where his forces annihilated over 30,000 soldiers in one of the largest ambushes in history. Rome was stunned. Panic spread through the Republic. Hannibal seemed unstoppable, and many Italian allies began wavering in their loyalty to Rome. The Senate responded by appointing a dictator, Quintus Fabius Maximus, whose cautious strategy earned him the nickname Conctator. Rather than meet Hannibal in open battle, Fabius shadowed him, harassing his supply lines while avoiding direct confrontation. Though unpopular, this Fabian strategy preserved Rome's strength, but the Romans were impatient. They craved a decisive victory. The disaster at Cannae in 216 BCE, Rome raised the largest army in its history, nearly 80,000 men to confront Hannibal at Cannae in southern Italy. The Romans believed sheer numbers would overwhelm their foe. Hannibal, however, devised one of the most brilliant battle strategies ever recorded. He arranged his forces in a crescent formation, with weaker infantry in the center and stronger troops on the flanks. As the Romans pushed forward, the crescent bent inward, trapping the Roman army in a deadly pocket. Then, Hannibal's cavalry swept around and struck from behind. The Romans were encircled completely. What followed was a slaughter. As many as 50,000 Roman soldiers were killed in a single day. Cannae was Rome's darkest hour. Allies defected, morale crumbled, and many wondered if the Republic would survive at all. Rome's resilience. Yet Rome did not surrender. Unlike other states, which might have sought peace after such devastation, Rome fought on with relentless determination. The Senate refused all negotiations with Hannibal. Instead, it raised new legions, reorganized its forces, and doubled down on the Fabian strategy of attrition. Hannibal, though victorious, faced his own problems. His army was far from home, dependent on supplies from the Italian countryside. Carthage failed to send him sufficient reinforcements. His strategy relied on winning allies away from Rome, but while some defected, most Italian states remained loyal to the Republic. Over time, Hannibal's brilliance was blunted by Rome's sheer resilience. Rome strikes back, Spain and Sicily. While Hannibal ravaged Italy, Rome struck at Carthaginian holdings elsewhere. In Spain, Roman generals, most famously Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, launched a campaign to cut off Carthage's resources. Scipio proved to be a commander of rare skill, capturing key cities such as New Carthage and gradually driving the Carthaginians out of Spain. Meanwhile, Rome secured Sicily once again, ensuring control of the central Mediterranean. Step by step, Rome was tightening the noose around its enemy. The road to Africa. By 204 BCE, Scipio Africanus was ready to carry the war to Carthage itself. He invaded North Africa, forcing Hannibal to abandon his long campaign in Italy and return home to defend his city. The two greatest generals of the age finally met in 202 BCE at the Battle of Zama near Carthage. The Battle of Zama 202 BCE. Hannibal commanded a diverse army, including war elephants and experienced veterans. Scipio, however, had studied Hannibal's tactics for years and prepared carefully. When the Carthaginian elephants charged, Scipio ordered his soldiers to open corridors in their lines, allowing the beasts to pass harmlessly through before being driven off. Roman cavalry, under the Numidian Prince Masonius, an ally of Romout, flanked and defeated Hannibal's horsemen. Finally, the Roman legions clashed with Hannibal's infantry. The battle was fierce, but Scipio's tactics and the discipline of the legions prevailed. Hannibal's army was crushed. Carthage had lost. The peace settlement. The terms of the peace were devastating. Carthage was forced to surrender its fleet, pay a massive indemnity, and give up all territories outside Africa. Rome emerged as the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. Hannibal, though spared, lived in political exile until his eventual suicide years later, refusing to be handed over to Rome. His legend, however, endured as one of history's greatest military commanders. Consequences of the Second Punic War. The war transformed the Mediterranean world. For Rome, it was both a triumph and a turning point. Military legacy. Rome had proven its ability to recover from disaster and defeat even the most brilliant general of the age. Expansion. With Carthage crippled, Rome expanded further into Spain, Gaul, and eventually the Eastern Mediterranean. Political change. The war accelerated the militarization of Roman politics, as generals like Scipio gained enormous prestige and influence. Carthage's decline. Carthage survived, but as a shadow of its former self, its empire gone, its economy weakened, its ambitions shattered. Yet the rivalry was not truly over. Carthage remained a wealthy city, and its resurgence in trade and agriculture would once again provoke Roman suspicion. In time, this would lead to a third and final war, a war of annihilation. Part 3. The Last War. The Fall of Carthage. The First Punic War proved Rome's resilience. The Second Punic War revealed Rome's iron will against Hannibal's genius. But the Third Punic War would be something darker. This time, Rome was not fighting for survival. It was fighting to eliminate an enemy forever. What began as political tension and economic rivalry ended in one of the most infamous acts of destruction in history, the obliteration of Carthage itself. The Third Punic War 149–146 BCE was short compared to the first two, but its consequences were vast. It was not just the military campaign, it was an act of vengeance, a lesson to the world about Rome's power, and the symbolic birth of an empire that would dominate the Mediterranean for centuries. The uneasy peace after Zama, when Carthage was defeated at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE. It lost its empire, its fleet, and its ability to wage offensive war. But the city itself remained intact. For 50 years, Carthage lived under strict Roman restrictions. It could not raise armies without Rome's approval. It was forced to pay crushing war indemnities, and it lost its overseas possessions. Yet despite these humiliations, Carthage recovered economically. By the mid-2nd century BCE, Carthage had rebuilt itself into a prosperous trading hub once more. Its harbors bustled with commerce, its farmlands produced abundant grain, and its merchants thrived. Rome's indemnity payments were completed ahead of schedule. Carthage was no longer a military power, but it was still a wealthy one. And that, in Rome's eyes, was unacceptable. The politics of fear. Why did Rome, victorious and ascendant, decide to destroy Carthage completely? The answer lies in politics as much as strategy. Rome's senators remembered Hannibal. His victories at Trebia, Trasimene, and especially Cannae had scarred the Roman psyche. The fear of Carthage lingered in their collective memory. Moreover, Roman leaders began to see Carthage's revival as a potential threat. Even if Carthage was peaceful, its prosperity could one day finance another war. One senator, Marcus Porcius Cato, better known as Cato the Elder, became the loudest voice for Carthage's destruction. According to legend, he ended every speech in the Senate with the same chilling words: "Carthago delendas, Carthage must be destroyed." Over time, Cato's refrain became a rallying cry. Rome would not tolerate Carthage's recovery. Numidia and the spark of war. The final spark came from Rome's ally, the North African kingdom of Numidia. Its ambitious king Massinissa had fought alongside Scipio Africanus as Zamo began encroaching on Carthaginian territory. Under the terms of the peace treaty, Carthage was forbidden to wage war without Roman permission. Rome, however, consistently sided with Massinissa, refusing to allow Carthage to defend itself. As Numidian raids intensified, Carthaginian frustration boiled over. Finally, in 151 BCE, Carthage broke the treaty. Without Rome's approval, it raised an army to resist Numidia. Though the campaign was unsuccessful, it gave Rome the pretext it had been waiting for. In 149 BCE, the Roman Senate declared war. The Roman demands. When Roman forces arrived in North Africa, Carthage attempted to negotiate. The city was willing to surrender hostages, weapons, and even part of its territory. But Rome's demands went further. Carthage was ordered to abandon its city entirely and resettle at least 10 miles inland, effectively ending its existence as a maritime power. For the Carthaginians, this was too much. To leave their ancient city, their homes, their harbors, it was unthinkable. Faced with annihilation, they chose to resist. The Third Punic War had begun. The siege of Carthage. The war was not a grand series of battles like Hannibal's campaigns. It was a brutal siege, lasting nearly 3 years. Carthage was well fortified, surrounded by massive triple walls, and defended by desperate citizens. Men, women, and even children worked tirelessly to build weapons and reinforce defenses. The city became a fortress of defiance. At first, the Roman campaign faltered. Commanders struggled against Carthage's stubborn resistance. The Carthaginians even launched daring counterattacks, burning Roman siege engines and raiding supply lines. But in 147 BCE, Rome sent a new commander, Publius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus. Like his famous ancestor, Scipio Aemilianus was a disciplined, ruthless leader. He reorganized the army, tightened the blockade, and systematically strangled Carthage's defenses. The fall of the city. By 146 BCE, the end had come. Scipio launched a final assault, storming the city street by street. What followed was one of the most harrowing episodes in ancient history. Roman soldiers fought block by block, setting buildings aflame and cutting down defenders. The fighting raged for 6 days. Families barricaded themselves in their homes, temples were turned into fortresses, and the cries of the dying echoed through the burning streets. The last resistance came at the Temple of Eshmun, where thousands of Carthaginians made their final stand. When the temple was stormed, many defenders chose death by fire rather than surrender. Finally, Carthage was silent. The aftermath of destruction. The destruction of Carthage was total. The surviving population, perhaps 50,000 out of hundreds of thousands, was sold into slavery. The city itself was systematically burned and leveled to the ground. Later Roman writers added dramatic embellishments, claiming that the Romans plowed salt into the earth so nothing would grow again. Whether literal or symbolic, the message was clear. Carthage was not merely defeated, it was erased. Rome annexed its territory as the province of Africa, securing control of the western Mediterranean permanently. The consequences: the fall of Carthage marked a turning point, not just for Rome, but for the ancient world. Rome's absolute dominance. With Carthage gone, Rome faced no rival in the western Mediterranean. Its path toward empire was open. Economic power. The fertile lands of North Africa became one of Rome's key sources of grain, fueling its growing population. Psychological triumph. The destruction of Carthage was both revenge for past wars and a warning to others. Rome's enemies would not merely be defeated, they would be annihilated. Moral debate. Even in Rome, some questioned the morality of wiping out a city so completely, but the majority celebrated it as a triumph of destiny. The legacy of the Punic Wars. Together, the 3 Punic Wars transformed Rome from a powerful republic into a global superpower. The First War gave Rome Sicily and its first overseas possessions. The Second War tested Rome's will against Hannibal and led to dominance in Spain and beyond. The Third War eliminated Carthage entirely, leaving Rome supreme in the western Mediterranean. But the wars also reshaped Rome itself. The expansion of territory brought wealth, slaves, and resources, but also inequality, corruption, and political instability. Victories abroad planted the seeds of civil wars at home. As Rome celebrated the ashes of Carthage, it was unknowingly laying the foundation for both its greatest glory and its eventual turmoil. The Punic Wars were not merely battles between 2 cities. They were struggles for identity, survival, and supremacy. For Carthage, it was the tragedy of a proud people erased from history, their legacy surviving only through the stories told by their conquerors. For Rome, it was the forging of destiny, a republic hardened in war, tempered by loss, and elevated to empire. The rivalry between Rome and Carthage stands as a reminder of both the heights of human ambition and the depths of human destruction. It was a contest that began with ships clashing off Sicily and ended with flames consuming a once great city. As Scipio Aemilianus stood amid the ruins of Carthage, ancient sources tell us he wept, realizing that all cities, even Rome itself, must one day fall. In the ashes of Carthage, Rome had secured its empire, but it had also written a darker lesson that victory, when pursued without mercy, can come at the cost of humanity itself.